Akira, Drive, and the McLaren F1. What do these three things have in common? Sure, they're all fantastic pieces of art, but there's something more that binds these things together, which is an inherent love and appreciation for machines. And just as much as the creators behind them, we come to appreciate these machines. Their intricacies, their mechanisms, the way they push the boundaries of what's possible. Even if we might not understand how or why, these machines tend to drive us as much as we drive them. Because machines are more than mere tools, or even more than just the sum of their parts. They've been designed and built for purpose. And with certain very special machines, not only are they iconic in their own right, but they can stand for something, invoke a feeling, or even be a manifestation of someone's hopes and dreams forged into a chassis. To make something truly iconic, something that will last the test of time, something that will push the boundary for what's possible, you yourself would need to relinquish a piece of your soul to it as well. Akira is special because, at least in fictional media, it is probably the best example of what I'm trying to convey here. Hell, it was the first thing that came into my mind when I thought up the concept for this video. And even after hours of Google searching, different versions of the phrase, most iconic vehicle in media, nothing came close to Akira. I mean, come on, really think about it. How many movies can you think of that aren't necessarily based around vehicles, cars, so no Pixar cars, no Fast and the Furious, none of that, that have a vehicle as iconic as Canada's bike? Like, come on, even if you've never heard of or seen Akira before, I can almost guarantee you've seen this poster somewhere. And B, also show a deep appreciation for those machines. I'm sure your mind might instantly go to something like, I don't know, Back to the Future maybe, and the DeLorean. That's pretty iconic, right? But I don't think it really fits the bill for what I'm trying to portray here. You see, Canada's bike is special. Not just because it's fucking badass as all hell, but because it's more than that. Unlike the DeLorean, it's not a plot device in and of itself. And I mean, in a way, the bike kind of is inconsequential to the overarching story Akira really is trying to tell, which I think actually goes to make this point all the more stronger, because despite that, it still represents something. The iconic red bike we all know is a physical manifestation of Tetsuo's envy, mankind's pursuit for something greater, and our relentless perseverance. Just like the city of Neo-Tokyo itself, Canada's bike is a testament to our resilience and our ability to rebuild. The bike itself is an old racing bike, which, if you didn't know, is the reason it has all the sponsorship stickers slapped all over it. No, Canon wasn't promoting motorcycle gangs in the far future, or technically the past at this point in time. Canada took that old bike and repurposed it to suit him. Just like he says in the beginning when Tetsuo is marveling over it having over 200 horsepower and redlining at 12,000 RPMs. And it's the little details like that that make this bike all the more special. These details are inconsequential, but they were put there deliberately on purpose. You wouldn't just write that in a story for no reason. The subtle care in designing the bike and all of its intricacies comes from a deep-rooted love for machines, a love of human creation. A person simply looking to write a compelling narrative or theatrical masterpiece might not consider these little details. Rather than losing the forest for the trees, they instead look at the big picture and do their best to convey what they're trying to convey that way. But there is something to be said about appreciating the trees, because without them, there is no forest. And the soul of Akira, hell, most of Akira's identity as a piece of fiction is all intertwined with that red bike. It was purposefully crafted and a testament to humanity's resilience and ability to rebuild. Because as shown in the film, even after, as advertised, Neo Tokyo explodes, that very bike is still kicking. Because that bike is everything that Akira stands for. Drive 2011, featuring literally me, as everyone seems to put it, is a story about a man who comes off as someone likely on the spectrum, showing quite a few socially awkward tendencies, like his mannerisms, to the very little words he says, to his oddly flimsy and loose handshake, and I mean, who can forget the constant toothpick in his mouth? This man, quite literally, navigates the world through his driving. He's a stunt driver by day and getaway driver by night. It's all he knows, but clearly he's longing for something in his life that adrenaline just can't give him. But the story isn't necessarily what's important here, and I'm not the best person to dissect it anyway. I've only ever watched this film once, and that was only like a month ago for the first time. What I really found most interesting about Drive, and what actually inspired me to watch it in the first place, is how it changed Ryan Gosling as a person. You see, there was this clip I saw while I was doom scrolling through Instagram Reels, as you do, from an interview where Ryan said he never really liked cars. He never really got car enthusiasts and what made them so attached to cars in that way. But then after filming Drive, it clicked. He finally got it.
It's the most fun I've ever had preparing for a movie. I helped rebuild the 73 Chevy Malibu, and I stunt drove all day. We would go to parking lots and run these cars until they caught on fire, and then a truck would take them away, and then I'd go work on my Malibu. So it was I never really cared about cars, but I get it.
And afterwards, even took his Chevy Malibu from the set as a memento.
I have my car from Drive.
You do? Mm-hmm. That's so cool.
Which, I mean, for a guy with that kind of money and fame, is a pretty damn modest car to own. So clearly, it struck a chord with him on a much deeper level. No longer was it just a car. It was also about the memories he made with it and the enjoyment he had driving it for this movie. Because they did a lot of driving. So a guy who didn't care for cars became attached and sentimental about a machine. Which is even more interesting because the director he worked with, Nicholas Winding Refn, doesn't care for cars in the slightest. My guy is on the record saying he doesn't care about cars, and that goes so far to the fact that he's a fully grown man that doesn't even have a driver's license. Now, I don't want to shame anyone for their life choices, but how do you go and fail your driving test 8 times? But yikes, man. He can make significantly better and more cinematic movies than I ever could dream of, and probably has far more money than I could ever dream of. But what my guy can't do is a fully fucking hectic burnout. So take that, colorblind guy that has a better eye for color grading than I ever will. It's funny though, because even in his apathy for cars, he not only based the whole movie around the act of driving, he inadvertently created a whole new car enthusiast from the approach him and Ryan took in creating this film, which was having far less voice lines for Ryan and far more plain and simple driving. Mobile Suit Gundam is an anime series directed by Yoshiyuki Tomino in 1979. And while admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of the original Gundam series compared to Zeta and pretty much every single Gundam that came after it, that doesn't take away from how iconic this piece of fiction is. Not only for its political commentary and progressiveness in quite a few areas for the time it was made, but for the sheer love for machines Tomino clearly had when creating his Gundam. For anyone who doesn't know, Gundams are the shiny mechanical draw card for what is usually a political story. But politics aside, Gundam wasn't just made that way by accident. Despite them being a vehicle for politics, mobile suits are still really fucking badass in theory. Like, look at the absolute state of some of these things. Imagine having that in reality. And what I find coolest about them is how grounded in reality they are. Sure, it's a very big stretch to say that. It is so unlikely we would ever see a real life Gundam or anything like it in our lifetime or our kids' lifetime or their kids' lifetime for that matter, unless we happen to make some absolutely insane technological strides. But when compared to every other mecha series of the time, Gundam had a stark contrast, because Tomino himself wanted to create something different, something more grounded, less fantastical like every other mecha series out there. But with the kind of story he wanted to tell, and still in the mecha genre, he had to make a giant robot of sorts, or his anime would never get greenlit by the suits because it would never sell toys. So the 18-meter tall shining example and first of its kind real robot was born. Mobile Suit Gundam pioneered what the real robot genre came to be. A form of mecha far more grounded in reality than its predecessors like Mazinger Z, and still even more grounded than some series that came after it that stuck with the more dated formula like Voltron. This changing concept aided Gundam's mass appeal, and while it did have a bit of a rocky start, it laid the foundations for a genre that in time would hold far greater success and longevity than any of its contemporaries. Because real robots are real, so we can understand and relate to them on a far deeper level. Real robots have limitations. They're built with tools. They can be broken, they can be fixed, they can be drawn up on blueprints, they can be modified for purpose, just like any other machine in real life, whether they be cars, bikes, tanks, planes, trains, or whatever the hell you're into. Not only that, the original Gundam, the RX-78-2, just like Canada's bike, stood for something. Like a Spartan in the Halo series, the Gundam was a sign of hope, a symbol of the tide in battle shifting in your favor when it shows up, or an ominous white devil that'll absolutely decimate your squad if you happen to be on the receiving end of it. It had a colossal impact in the context of its story, and was a machine that reshaped the mecha genre as a whole, trailblazing its own path in creating my personal favorite genre of mecha, real robot. On top of that, Tomino himself cared so much for his creation that at the Yokohama Gundam factory, when it was still there, he had a written apology plastered on one of the walls. And the apology was there to essentially say, sorry. Sorry that it wasn't possible to make the life-size Gundam statue that already moved and was impressive enough actually walk on its own 2 feet. Bro worked so hard alongside so many talented engineers to bring his vision into reality and create one of, if not the coolest interactive pieces of mechanical artistry I have ever seen in my life. That was a 1-to-1 scale of his vision from all the way back in 1979, and it still wasn't enough for this guy. He still wished he could have pushed it further. That is the soul Tomino captured in the very Gundam he created nearly half a century ago, and is one that will likely live on long past him. The McLaren F1 is a no-compromise machine. Something you definitely don't see every day, and something we're seeing less and less of as the years go on, and corporate greed continues to infest and tear down any semblance of artistry left in this damn world. Yeah, that's a little bleak, but I can't lie. The way technology is advancing these days, particularly with artificial intelligence, has aged me another 40 years and turned me into a 60-year-old boomer. But despite that, the fact a machine like the F1 is even allowed to exist in the first place is an absolute marvel. Dreaming about creating the greatest road car ever made is one thing. Pitching it to those with the money to make it happen is another. But then following through with the plan and delivering on it, breaking records and dominating the racing world as a byproduct because all you wanted to do is make the greatest road car, but it turns out when you make the greatest road car, it subsequently is also a really freaking great race car. Yeah, that's just fucking insane. Gordon Murray, Creighton Brown, Ron Dennis, Mansour Ojay, Paul Roche, Peter Stevens, and Steve Randall. These were only some of the great minds involved in creating McLaren's masterpiece. And because of how hard they went to create such a spectacular car, paired with the fact that each and every one of the 60 or so that were made being handcrafted, means that not only those men, but each and every single person in George Murray's factory crafting a McLaren F1 that likely won't have their name go down in the history books like the men I listed off previously, all still have a piece of their soul etched into every curve, every body line, every crevice, and each individual nut and bolt put on every single McLaren F1 built on this planet. And if the fact it was fast and cool as all hell wasn't reason enough for it to be as expensive as they are, that probably adds to the price too. The sound of its naturally aspirated V12 is embedded with Murray's vision and Roche's prowess, and you would feel that each and every time you start that motor. The way its wedged body cuts through air, its comfort, its centered seat and driver focus, its controllability, its delivery of power. There is just so much character in this one machine, and if that doesn't have a soul, I don't know what does. The story of the McLaren F1 and its creation is a really, really interesting one, and one I definitely couldn't do justice, especially compared to someone else who's already done it. So if you are interested in the F1, I highly recommend checking out the Squids video. You seriously won't regret it. Now, I can only speculate on everything I said about the F1 from what I've heard about it, because personally, I've never seen one, let alone sat in one or started one. But a car I don't need to speculate on is the Lexus LFA. No, I haven't drove, sat in, or even personally started up an LFA myself, but I've definitely seen one, heard one, and gotten very up close and personal with one. You see, I'm lucky enough to be the proud owner of what I would maybe a bit too generously call a baby LFA in the Lexus ISF, a naturally aspirated V8 tuned by Yamaha, squeezed into a chassis that was probably a little too small for it and maybe has some heating issues because of that, but created a freaking dream of a car to drive. Debuting right alongside a second concept of its big brother at the 2007 Detroit Auto Show, this machine was something new for Lexus, something performance-oriented, something ambitious, a soft launch of sorts, and a true testament to their commitment to support the F line of cars in the lead up to the eventual release of the LFA, although that was still a few years to come at this point. Lexus wasn't just making highbrow vehicles anymore, it was still as refined as it had ever been, but now, as the spokesman himself said 16 years ago, it hauled ass. The ISF was the brainchild of Lexus chief engineer Yukihiko Yaguchi, a man who got so tired of waiting for the company he worked for to create a car that he would want to drive that he decided to just make it himself. Even with no budget originally allocated to his idea, Yaguchi started working on the ISF on his own, just on the side. Like how I would work on my YouTube videos on my break at my day job, this really was a passion project for him. When the project eventually did gain some steam, he was only allocated a few hundred people at a time to work on it, which is just a shell of the few thousand people a project of this scope usually would get. So it's said that he handpicked some of the most dedicated people at Lexus he knew that would also have the passion and drive to create a performance vehicle for Lexus to help bring his dream into reality. And even then, his team weren't allowed to work on the ISF at a full-time rate either. They also had to work on it on the side. But despite everything, the passion of a few hundred, guided by one man's vision, created the debut F car, the perfect daily driver. And honestly, as someone who owns one, I can confidently say I feel the soul put into that car every time I drive it. Every time I hit that push to start, every time I hear that second wastegate open. Something else. So I can only imagine how it would feel to get behind the wheel of Lexus's magnum opus, the LFA. I've heard it's a Yamaha tuned V10 in person, and I've seen every nook and cranny of the thing up close and personal while my own F was getting serviced. I probably looked like an amazed little kid just gawking at it, or maybe a right weirdo admiring that car and circling it a few times to really see every body line and every detail on it. And it's honestly gorgeous. I could really gush about it all day. Like, for example, did you know that the LFA shares some body lines with the ISF? It's not a perfect match, but if you look at the shape of the duct in front of the rear wheel well on the LFA, and the way it blends right into the side skirt, it bears a striking resemblance, albeit reversed, to the ISF's front overfender that also blends into its side skirt. But there are so many finer details to the car than just that, and it was all brought together by one man's vision, Haruhiko Tanahashi, who wanted to make Japan's first and best supercar, and was lucky enough to get Akira Toyota, the grandson of the founder of Toyota itself, to back the LFA project with everything that he had. It was clear that this project was always going to come out at a loss. But even at a loss, Akira wanted to see what Tanahashi could create. He wanted to see his dream come to fruition. He wanted to see his grandfather's company deliver the greatest Japanese supercar ever made. Something that was so bold for Toyota that it drew inspiration from the world's very first hypercar, the McLaren F1, because great art inspires great art. And the devil was in the details of this machine. Not only was the V10 revolutionary for Toyota, being stupidly light, small, and more than anything, of course, it's Toyota, it's reliable, it also screamed and wanted to be heard. And of course, thanks to Yamaha, it was. They made the 1LR sing, but more than that, they made sure that the driver heard it by getting Toyota to create specific echo chambers that would deliver direct feedback from that orchestra of a V10 right back into the driver's ears. Like, who even thinks of that? They went so far with this project that Tanahashi felt the need to construct the entire thing out of carbon fiber in-house, which is something Toyota had never done before, and was a really cool idea in theory and in practice, but also delayed the project by a little bit. But when you've got a vision and the backing of your company's founder's grandson behind you, why wouldn't you push the limits and really make your dream a reality? The end result of that pursuit for perfection is not only the greatest Japanese supercar ever made that'll leave a lasting legacy in Toyota's history books, but it also birthed my personal, unattainable dream car. And it's been that way ever since I saw it at 12 years old in the cinema at the end of Fast 5. There are so many examples of cars with deep, rich souls, none of which are Teslas, weirdly enough, that I could sit here all day getting into the nitty-gritty of each and every one of them with you. But I don't need to get into everything to get my point across. You know the cars you like. Even the cars you've owned likely have a piece of someone else's history and soul intertwined to their chassis. Hell, they might even have a piece of your history and soul intertwined to the chassis. With every repair, every service, every modification you make, you're etching yourself into that vehicle. And I think when it really comes to the soul of a machine, that is just as valuable as the engineers and the ideas that created the machine in the first place. And that's not to discredit their work in any way. It's only to say that soul can come from so many different places. Except for artificial intelligence. AI is interjecting itself into our lives in so many perversive ways. And while sure, it can be a really great tool, especially in things like Photoshop and video editing when it does basic things like, I don't know, remove backgrounds from images if you want a PNG, or I don't know, removing an unwanted person from a photograph without having to clone stamp a million times and ending up with a pretty shitty result in the end anyway. But it has gone so much further than simple use cases. The way it's going, AI is on a path to destroy creativity as a whole. Anything that requires a minute of thought can be solved, albeit typically not well, with AI. Eddie Burbank did an amazing video on it recently, and one particular example really stood out to me, which was an ad by Google promoting its AI by showing a man helping his daughter write a letter to her idol. But rather than actually teaching her anything, he just uses AI to create the letter. Imagine having the chance to have your voice heard by someone you admire, only to silence yourself and let an artificial language model pretend to be you. Every semblance of nuance is lost and you're left with just a husk of what could have been great. The same thing's happening with YouTube and content creation as a whole. The level of absolute regurgitated slop all over platforms like this one, TikTok, Instagram Reels, Twitter, no matter where you go, it's inescapable. My videos aren't perfect. I'll be real. Some of them aren't even good. But they're mine. They're my voice and my words and my nuances, and haven't been tampered with to make my workflow faster, to produce more content and generate more revenue. Because at that point, not only would I become part of the machine, I would then lose my soul in the process. In a vain attempt to try and generate some success a couple of years ago, I actually created a TikTok slop fucking account that was really just, Reddit stories with Minecraft in the background and all AI generated voices. And I'll be real, it was super fucking easy to do, but it just made me feel so empty inside. Why was I spending my time on that junk when I could just be improving my own craft and work on real videos and actual thoughts and ideas that I care about and actually have something to say about? That phase lasted all of 2 weeks, and while those are 2 weeks I'll never get back, I'm really glad I put it to an end there. This channel's growth might be slow. Hell, it might never take off to the level I want it to, but it is mine. AI can do a lot, and it's coming whether we like it or not. But one thing it can't do is replicate true artistry. And there will always be a perceived value from other human beings for something that was man-made. The writing is on the wall, and that's why you see YouTubers like Doug DeMuro, for example, by his Countach. These older, more analog cars are pure. They're drivers' cars. They're different. They have road presence. They evoke an emotion while you're driving them. And when electric cars are faster in a line than anything we've ever come to know anyway, it's the character, the driving experience, the soul that makes a car valuable and sought after now. Machines like the F1, LFA, and so many more are ones that people need to dedicate their lives to their craft to create. And the end result is something pure, something with soul, and something that will leave behind a legacy. I think there's the deep-rooted part somewhere in all of us that wants to leave something behind once we've inevitably left this earth. I didn't want to get too philosophical here, but it kind of needs to be said to wrap this whole thing up. Death is inevitable, no matter who you are, no matter how much money you have, no matter how much fame you have, no matter how much influence you have, your time is going to be up someday. And the only way to truly live past death is through our creations and the impact we've had on others. That's why so many people dedicate their lives to their craft, whether that be through the stories they tell, the moments they capture, the music they create, or the machines they've built. It's all a form of artistry to impact people right now and long into the future. And people have already done it. That's why Katsuhiro Otomo created the world of Akira, with its cycle of destruction and creation. Why Nicholas Winding Wren and Ryan Gosling went on their abstract, low dialogue, pure driving iteration of Drive. Why Yoshiyuki Tomino revolutionized the mecha genre and dove headfirst into the real robot genre with Gundam rather than sticking to the status quo. Why George Murray had the passion for and the ability to build the McLaren F1. Why Akio Toyoda gave Haruhiko Tanahashi his complete support to create the best Japanese supercar despite it hemorrhaging money. And why I make videos like this in the first place. I'm sure you've heard a saying before that you die twice. Once when you take your last breath, and again, the last time your name is ever said. Now, I'm pretty vain myself, but I don't think I'm vain enough to realistically think I'm ever going to be remembered past my grandkids' generation. Regardless though, I do want to try and leave an impact on as many people as I can while I can. And as a neat byproduct, if for whatever reason my kids or grandkids ever want to really know more about me, they'd have a whole catalogue of videos that are mine, with my thoughts, my nuances, my inflections, my everything, really. So if I happen to die young, or you're watching this years in the future, hey, I hope you're doing well. And thanks for listening to me ramble for this whole video, because, well, it's probably one of my favorite things to do. For those of you watching right here and now, this might be a little bit awkward, but fuck it, I'm keeping this in. In a world like we're in today, things that are genuinely real, things that have thought and passion behind them and aren't simply made as some sort of way to generate the most profit, are very rare. Which is why, if you've looked at the price of some really neat driver's cars over the years, they're very expensive. As people, we appreciate man-made machines' mechanisms, their intricacies, their output, the way they push the boundaries of what's possible and deliver an experience unlike anything we've ever thought possible. These machines drive us just as much as we drive them. In the pursuit of greatness, or coming back down to earth, even at a time in your life where you just want to feel something, these machines will help you do it. And it doesn't matter how grand or humble, if you've put your mark on something, it has a piece of you in it. Because the soul in machines is what we leave behind for others to find and appreciate, even long after we're gone.